Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, as always, we've got a treat. Jenni Field is in the house. Jenni is internal communication and leadership credibility expert and speaker, also author of Nobody Believes You. Jenni, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
It's great to have you. Obviously, you know this, but our listeners don't. Mr. Chris Ducker had recommended you to be on the show. And I said, yeah, anyone who's a friend of Chris is a friend of ours. So excited to dive into the topic. But before we go into that, tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I'm delighted that Chris recommended me. I've worked with him for a while, so it's always nice to know that he's recommending some of his friends. So how did I get here? God, what a journey. So I have worked in communication and leadership credibility really for about 20 years. So I worked inside organizations up until about 8 years ago. So I worked as sort of media relations advisor, head of internal communications, communications director, those sort of roles inside large corporate organizations in the pharmaceutical industry, in the defense space, in retail hospitality. And then in 2017, I realized that where I was wasn't really right for me. And it was a case of, if not now, when, I suppose, like, what do you do next? And decided to go out on my own and created Redefining Communications as a consultancy to help organizations go from chaos to calm. That was my whole ambition, through helping people improve communication, employee experience, all those things that really matter when you work inside organizations. So that's what I started to do. And 8 years on from that, I've survived a global pandemic. I've published a couple of books. I've done some research into things like frontline workers and how to communicate with them. And I'm just really passionate about helping leaders be the best they can be inside organizations. And I think when all the work I've done over those 8 years to help organizations improve communication, everything comes back to the leadership team, how the leaders communicate. And I think that's such an underestimated skill for anyone that's leading a team or an organization. And no one teaches you how to do that, right? We all communicate all the time. So yeah, that's how I kind of got here. It was if not now, when, to here, and 8 years on, still going strong.
So when you got started, what was it that sparked your interest in this industry? Was it the chaos and your ability to turn chaos into calm? Was it the communication? Was it the leadership? There's a lot of interesting elements there.
Yeah. When I started working, I suppose, I wanted to work in PR. I think it was the glamour of what you believe all of that to be like from TV shows. And then you quickly realize that's not true. And then working through that, the thing that really interests me is the chaos. It is there's chaos in here, but there's always a way through that. There's always things that make sense. There's always ways to pull those pieces together. And that is what I love about what I do now. So people will come to me and say, my leadership team aren't working how I want them to work, or we feel very disconnected from our team and our employees. And there's always a reason why. So being able to spend the time talking to people, listening to the words, watching the body language, observing meetings, and finding out what it is that's really going on, and then being able to fix that, that's what I love.
Love that. So communication, I think, is so fascinating because it's verbal, it's nonverbal, from personal relationships to business to world conflict.
Yeah.
It tends to be, in many cases, the driver one way or the other on success or failure. So I'm curious, as you go into, from afar, or you go into businesses and you're listening for these things. What are some triggers that kind of alert you to say, like, all right, I think I found something. This might be where some of the communication breakdown. Because I think for anyone, if they could see where they're breaking down, they might be able to fix it.
Yeah. And that's always the question, is where am I going wrong? And that's That's hard because it requires us to be quite self-aware and be quite objective of ourselves, which is a really difficult thing to do. So when I'm going in and talking to teams, I'm looking at some trends. So I'm looking at that consistent messaging from different people, but I'm looking at the language people are using. So if we take a meeting environment, if someone says, I don't know where you are with this, it's quite accusatory in language. Whereas if they said, what's happening here? Like, can you share a bit more about how we've got here or what's happening? It's just much softer. It's less accusatory. It feels less angry, and it changes that power dynamic in those relationships. So I'm always listening to the words people are using. And I'm also watching and looking out for the signals that people are talking about. So how we talk about the organization, or we talk about our team, or what we're doing, or what we're trying to change, or all of those things, that's linked to your values, your purpose, why you're doing what you're doing. Because if that anchor isn't there, it means that you're not aligned to something. And then it means that you're just making decisions that don't really make much sense. And that can make it much harder to communicate why we're doing it this way, linking things to something bigger than ourselves to make it more meaningful. So that's what I'm always listening for, is the words and the alignment to that bigger purpose and the values. That's my starting point.
I think that's such a great insight, because the alignment piece in particular, I think, one of the things I reference all the time is words matter, right? And so the things that you say, and what you want to balance that with is you don't want people to also feel calculated.
Yes.
So you want to be thoughtful in what you're saying, but you don't want to be so calculated that it doesn't feel personal or genuine. And to your point, I feel like when you know that they're bought into the core, into the foundation, into the vision, you know that at least, I don't know, half of the communication is already solved for. Because even when they say the wrong stuff, they're at least going directionally the right way.
Yeah.
And you can coach the rest. But so how do you, I guess, how do you find that? Like, how do you find where's this alignment? Is it to your point, like there's more accusation, there's more there is just chaos around the communication, like it's inconsistent, or like, how do you kind of get the sense of like, what, I don't think they're actually bought into what this is actually trying to do?
Yeah. And this is, so some of the work I've done more recently, which is linked to the book, is around what makes somebody credible. Like, why do we follow someone? And this sort of links into that. So there are 8 practices that would make you a credible leader that somebody would follow. And one of those is visionary. And that's being able to sort of inspire people, have good communication skills, and sort of take people on that journey. There's always something that happens when that's missing. So when you don't have that visionary practice, what you get from your team is apathy. So what I'm looking for are those kind of symptoms that we're seeing in organizations. So if people just aren't really moving forward, they're not really interested, they're just sort of showing up and just doing the minimum, then we have a visionary problem here. Like, we need to be clearer about where we're going, what's happening, so people can come along with that. And there's always something. So if we have something where we have employees or the team being quite disrespectful to the leadership. So sometimes people will say they're just not listening, or they're not coming with us, or they're being very argumentative. Then disrespect can happen when people don't think we're capable at doing the work that we're doing. And if we're not demonstrating that capability, then people will question that and disrespect you in doing that. So it's looking at those symptoms that are going on inside the organization and matching that to behaviors or that communication infrastructure, if you like the consistency and the tools that you're using. So it's both. It's always that behavior and communication from leaders. And then it's kind of your communication infrastructure around how you're communicating and the frequency of that.
Love that. So how does that apply, as you've seen it, to like a newer leader? One of the things I feel like when somebody kind of first gets into this role, so many try to jump in the first 90 days and like solve the world's problems. And it's like, I would say for every leader I've ever coached, developed, anything, right? Like, it's always like the first thing, like, okay, you're in, even if you're in the same company, if you're in a new chair, like, take a minute, take 60 days, take 90 days, just soak it in first. And so I'm curious. And so that visionary piece is hard early.
Yes.
Because they don't even know exactly what it is. They might have some ideas and some guts, but it could be off to the point where it's hard to gather buy-in. So I'm curious how you've seen that work with like newer leaders.
Yeah. So if you're a newer leader, actually you don't need your visionary practice straight away, because people will, I don't mind a bit of apathy at the beginning. If I'm trying, as a leader, if I'm trying to figure out where we're going and I'm listening and I'm talking to people and I'm want to hear what's going on and take that time, then I'm happy that we're just moving, like maybe just a little bit. So I'm okay with that. The things I want to be focusing on those early stages is making sure that you feel supported, that you can trust me and you believe I have integrity. And those are the things that I want to make sure are clear. Because if I don't do that up front, then we don't have those foundations. Like you'll just disengage from me, you'll distrust me, and then we've got nothing. Like they are the building blocks of most relationships, right? So those are the things I would be doing first. I'd be making sure that I was being very open, I was being transparent and honest, I was taking action so people can see me doing stuff. And I'm doing what I say I'm going to do, and having that space for conversation and listening. And I think if you're doing that as a new leader, you're listening, you're doing what you say you're going to do, you're showing up when you've said you're going to show up, then those are the things to build as that sort of start of that relationship of trust. And I think that relationship word is important because we think about relationships in our personal lives. We don't always talk about them at work. But if you think about those personal relationships, that's all about figuring out, can I trust you? Are you the right person for me? Are our values aligned? That's the same, no matter where that relationship is. It's just a different relationship. So that's where the attention needs to be. And then once you know what you're doing, or you've got an idea of where you want to go, then you can start that inspiring people, that movement, taking people on that journey. But you don't have to rush to get there. There's no hurry. And I think sometimes we're made to feel like you're a new leader coming in, you have to create change, you have to do stuff differently, you have to make your mark. Just give it time and listen and make sure that that's the right mark that you want to leave.
Jenni, let's flip that question around a little bit, and let's say maybe you are a leader. You've been in the role in the company for a long time, and it is tumbling in the opposite direction from where you want it to go. We've seen this a lot with older generations that might be a second generation business, and things have gotten stale and stagnant. What do you do when you feel like the culture is declining, the leadership's declining, and you've built, whether you want to believe it or not, maybe this personal brand of, people aren't following you and the culture is falling apart?
Yeah. So to look at that, there's two ways of approaching that. So the way you're describing it is looking at the symptoms that are around you. So we're looking at like what's going on. And to really know that, we have to listen. So we have to go out and talk to people and understand what's going on and figure out what it is that's not working. So we use big words a lot, like the culture's not working, or we don't collaborate enough. And I don't like, what does that mean? So I really want to get underneath that. Like, is it that we're not living our values, or you don't know what our values are, or we've said something and we're not doing that? So what's really going on underneath some of those? So if you've identified that, then listen, go out and talk to people with intention and create space to listen and hear what's going on. Then it's coming back as a team, because this has to be done as a team. You can't, no leader is an island. You can't go off and do stuff. So as a team, it's then going, okay, this is what we've heard. This is what we say our values are. This is what we say our purpose, our mission is. How does all of this feel? Like, is this all over the place? And it probably is if we're in the position that you've described. And then we have to make small steps to make changes against that. So we don't want to change it all in one go. But if we're saying, our value is X, but we're behaving like Y, okay, well, what can we do to shift this? Do we need a different policy? Do we need to change how we communicate? Do we need to change how we operate? What are the things that need to match that? Is this value still accurate? Is this who we really want to be? Does it need to be different now? Because this is a different time of leadership. Do we need to go somewhere else? But you have to make space to have those conversations as a leadership team. This isn't something you can do in a few hours in an afternoon. This is a couple of days away, looking at that deep work about the organization and what you want it to be. So that's where you have to start from. You have to do the listening, and you have to think about where you want to take that and where you want that to be. I always say there's no right or wrong leadership. And I say that boldly with the current state of high profile tech leaders and politicians, that for some people, those environments will be incredible and they will thrive and they will love it. And for others, they would hate it. But we all have different things that will make us work hard and we all have different things that we thrive in. So it's finding your style and finding how you want to lead. And that's where coaching, that one-to-one support, that self-awareness, understanding your own credibility and where those gaps are, that's where that sort of work comes in. But that's that kind of deeper work that you really do have to invest in as a leader.
Yeah, I find so often with a lot of these leaders who have gotten themselves in this position, it's sometimes not their fault, but it seems to me that it's really a lack of self-awareness. And, we might be trying, we might be putting our best foot forward, but not everyone picks up on the social cues, on the body language, on other things that may indicate that maybe, you don't inspire the team and maybe they're not following. And it
Yeah.
could just be little things that are all just adding up. Is that fair to
Yeah.
assume?
Oh, 100%. I use the phrase, I say unintended consequences a lot. Like with the best of intentions, there are unintended consequences here.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to also remember, to your point, like the majority of people come with positive intent. Like the majority of people are leading with the best of intentions, with the best of the knowledge that they've got. And they don't know that asking the question, like, where are you with this? And what they're just trying to get stuff done. Like their personality profile and trait is they just want to focus on the task and get it done. It doesn't mean that they hate that person or they're not interested, but that's their natural style. And unless you learn how to adapt that to get the best out of the people that you want to follow you, that is always really hard. So I definitely think remembering that we all come with that positive intent is important, and thinking about the outcomes that you're seeing, right? So if you're a leader and you're thinking, I think I'm doing okay, it's everyone else that's the problem, then it's time for us to have a look at you.
Yeah.
We have to do that piece. And that's uncomfortable. And I always say to teams, like, this could get a bit uncomfortable. You think I'm going to come in and tell you that they're the problem, and I'm actually going to come in and say that you're the problem. And that's difficult, but there's ways of working through that. And there's always a solution. And I think that's so important as a leader, that sometimes people say leaders, you're born a leader or you're this. Every single thing about being a credible leader people will follow is something that everyone can learn and build. There's nothing in there that is fixed from birth that you have to have. Like, it's all in that learning and testing different ways of doing stuff to get different outcomes.
It's interesting you say that, how often you go in and the leadership or leader thinks that, it's those around them, but it really is the leader. I went through this exact thing. I mean, I go through it, I guess, all the time, but I went through it in a real kind of, call it, more intense situation. I don't know, maybe a year ago, where there's some things that just weren't really working well around me and in our business. And our business, on the surface was doing awesome, but it wasn't working. And I was struggling with it for like 6 months until I finally realized it was me.
Yeah.
Like it was absolutely my dysfunction that, and the things that I was missing on that basically was impacting others. And so, to your point, that self-awareness, I always think, is an interesting term, because, like, by definition, people might be self-aware. I think people can be more self-aware than others. That I believe.
Yeah.
But no one can be fully self-aware, because that's why this is why, like, if you ever record yourself and you listen back, you're like, you recognize things you don't even realize you do. And so I think it's interesting when you talk about going in. I'm curious, as you've done this numerous times, I can only imagine how many times, how does that conversation go with the leaders that, some are probably very receptive, but some probably really struggle with that, thinking that they may not be the problem. So to the point of difficult conversation and how do you communicate, curious how you would approach something like that.
Yeah. So, and you do get some leaders who just don't want to hear it. I don't get invited back often to those. Because they're not ready, right? And I found that a lot is, I'll come back in a couple of years when we're ready to have that conversation. Yeah. When it gets difficult, the approach I always take is focusing on the impact on the organization or the business or the people, right? Because I could come in and say, that's quite accusatory language, which just isn't very nice.
Yeah.
So what? I want them to get the job done. I'm not interested, right?
Yeah.
It's an easy thing to come back on. Whereas if I say, when you're using language like that, it's going to make the team defensive and they're not going to be able to come forward with ideas, and you're going to stifle the innovation, which is what you're looking for from the team, because they're being a bit frightened, right? That's a different That's a different reason why, and that makes a bit more sense linked to the outcome that the leader's trying to get to. And that's the fundamental piece for me, is the link to the problem you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
If it's about, we want to be more innovative, we want to grow, we want to collaborate more, we want to stop working in silos, we want to have international growth, we want to be bought, we want to, whatever it is, there will be behaviors and communication that will help us achieve that. And there will be things that will stifle that. So it's focusing in on those things. I also am very comfortable in silence, which I appreciate is probably strange to hear while I'm talking on here. But I can ask a question and just sit quietly. And there's quite a lot in that power of silence sometimes, of I'm just going to let you reflect on what I've said, and we'll just take a minute here just to see how we feel about that.
Why is that so hard for people, Jenny? Specifically, probably more so men. I mean, I can say that just from my own lens, is that whether it's a leadership position, talking to a client, even a family member, sometimes it's really hard to do that. And I'm curious on your perspective. I'm sure it's a terrible quality as a leader, but why? And then how do you improve that?
So I think it's hard because quite often we want to make we have a thing about being liked. So if there's silence, that can signal to us that something's gone wrong if it feels uncomfortable. So if we then feel like, oh, but I need you to, I don't want you to not like me, so I'm going to fill this silence in the hope that that makes that connection come back. Whereas different personality types quite like silence. Like some people are really comfortable in silence and other people aren't. So it's being mindful of a bit of that. To practice the silence, and I have had to do this as someone who throughout their career wants to jump in with the solution because I can see it straight away and I'm like, just do this. I used to sit in meetings with my hand over my mouth. So I would sit in meetings like this and I would sit there, and that's the only way. And I still do it now, every now and then, when I think, I was doing an observation the other day for a leadership team. So I was just observing their management meeting, which is uncomfortable for everybody, right? There's someone in the room that's just taking notes and everyone's going, oh, what have I said that's made her write that down? But that's where I have to use my hand over my mouth technique. That's the only tip I've got, because it's the only one that's worked for me. But it's trying to signal to myself to just think before I'm speaking, and also letting other people have a chance. When you're someone that is quite quick to solutionize and quite quick to fix, you can stop other people from having that voice. So being able to create space for others when you are the leader is also important.
You know, what I found, and I've been working on this for a long time due to heightened self-awareness, is sometimes taking a moment to gather your thoughts and try to be a little bit more articulate. I know Dustin had mentioned something like you don't want to articulate too much because then you take out the authenticity of it. But sometimes taking a moment to gather yourself is never a bad thing. And it's helped me tremendously. Obviously, there's still a lot to improve on. You know, switching from that to kind of something that's semi-related to, and you've talked about this on your YouTube channel a lot, is vulnerability. And I've seen where there are some leaders who do it in such a charismatic, natural way that it really builds trust, and people want to follow people who are willing to open. But then I've seen other people do it only to feel like it's backfired. Like, you know, I thought I was trying to be myself, and then either someone holds it against you or holds it over your head or uses it against you. And so, you know, I'm always curious, is there a point of diminishing returns? Is there a point to where it's like, well, you've overshared, Chris, you know? And I find it a very interesting subject because it does work in most cases.
What's up, listeners? I just wanted to say thank you for being a part of the Hustle Nation community. We are absolutely thrilled and honored that you listen to our show. I wanted to take a break to share a special resource with you. I'm talking about our 2020 Vision Guide. This is a pivotal tool we use in our workshops where participants typically invest thousands of dollars for transformative experiences. Imagine having a crystal clear, actionable roadmap to not just meet, but exceed your personal and professional goals. That's the power of the 2020 Vision Guide. And here's the best part. We're offering it to you for free. This is your chance to leverage a tool that has propelled hundreds of people achieve unparalleled success. Visit our website now. I'm including the URL in the show notes below, where you can download our guide and start your journey toward clarity and achievement. Don't wait. It's time to create the life you deserve today. Now back to the show.
Yes, it does. And you're right about when you get it right, you can build the trust. So there's about three things I probably talk about vulnerability. The three things I say the most, I should say, about vulnerability. The first is that you're trying to establish connection. So it's always about thinking about the outcome you're trying to achieve from anything. So with every communication, everything you're trying to do is, what's the outcome I'm trying to achieve by doing this? To be vulnerable is connection. So to get that right, we have to balance being personal but not intimate. And that's where it goes wrong, is people step into the intimate space thinking I'm being vulnerable, whereas that's often too much for people. So let's stay in the personal space, and that will create the connection. Where it goes wrong is where we are communicating for ourselves. So like the first golden rule of good communication is that you're not communicating for yourself. It's not about you, it's about them. And so if we're being vulnerable and sharing something, I don't know, maybe about our mental health or something like that, that we feel we want to share, the first check is, am I sharing this for others or am I sharing it for myself? If it's for myself, I shouldn't be doing it. If it's for others, does sharing this help me create connection with the people I'm trying to talk to? If it's yes, fine. If not, don't do it. And if I'm part of a leadership team, are we all doing this? Because if I go out on my own and do this and no one else does it, I'm going to shine a spotlight on the fact that no one else is doing it because we're a team and no leader is an island. And I don't want to make that disconnection for them, which is an unintended consequence of my need to be vulnerable. So those are the things I look at. And where it goes wrong, where I've seen it go wrong, is where people have tried to create connection and told a personal story, but it hasn't matched the audience. So I often share a story of an event I was at where someone was talking about their hobby of learning to fly a plane. And I thought they were talking about Microsoft Simulator and learning to fly a plane like a game, but they were talking about actually learning to fly a plane, which is a very expensive hobby, right? So the majority of the audience were completely switched off because it's not something I can relate to. That's going to disconnect me because I can't relate to that, and you've lost me. And so it's being mindful of those stories that you're telling to make sure that they match the audience and who you're talking to. So that's always the bits that I focus on about vulnerability. And if you're really stuck and you don't know how to do it and you're running a business, running a team, most of us will use an out of office on our email at some point in our lives. Use that to say where you are. Don't just say, I'm out the office. Say, I'm out the office at my son's wedding. I'm at my daughter's graduation. I'm on holiday with my family in this place. And like, tell something more about you that's a bit more human, that creates that connection. That's a really good starting point to sort of play with vulnerability if it feels really scary.
Love that. So one of the things that you talked about, understand the outcome of the communication you're going to have. The other thing is, trying to focus the listener in some ways, right? Like the receiver, on what would be the implications of X, Y, and Z if it's a difficult conversation. I think that's such an important thing because as leaders, or just even as humans, we often see something that others don't see.
Yeah.
And, so just kind of curious on your thoughts on this, because in my mind, I think a lot of times as people are taking on leadership or they have miscommunication in a relationship or anything like that, it's usually because in their head, they're doing some sort of communication because they see some sort of outcome or some sort of negative consequence and they just assume that everyone else sees it. And so they don't communicate it, or they've communicated it once to another human, maybe not even that human, and assume since I've said it once, not only have you heard it, not only do you understand it, but you've implemented it. And so like one of the things I'm curious on your thoughts is, as leaders or humans, that kind of like I refer to as like almost a rock star effect, where you have to say the same thing over and over and over again and still having the same passion each and every time, even if it's the 100th time you've said it. How doing that consistently while not robotically, and what's the value of that? Why do people struggle with that? Along those lines.
Yeah. And it's true. We get bored of our own stuff way before anyone else does. And as someone that's written a couple of books, I feel like, how do you not know that I've written a book? When I meet people, especially in the communications industry, but we talk about it a few times and then we think we're moving on to the next thing. Like we're always chasing that next thing. And that's a real thing for visionary leaders, entrepreneurs. We're focusing on the next thing. So we have to sit in that message and be consistent. And we have to find the different stories that link to that allow us to keep that alive in different ways. So it's not about repeating the same tagline over again and the same statement over again. It's about what is that key statement, and then what are the stories that we want to tell about that, or what's the different messages we want to get across, and how do we do that? And that's the real art of communication, is it's finding the different ways of doing things to get the outcome that you want. And if it was easy, right, we'd probably all just email something out once and never have to talk about it ever again.
Yeah.
And everyone would know, and everyone would buy the stuff or follow the plan, and it would be lovely. But that isn't how we work as human beings. Like, it's a noisy world. We're easily distracted. Our attention span is kind of, 45 minutes, then we need a break. So there's lots of stuff in there to battle against. And we all have different preferences for how we want to communicate. So I like to go to events to learn. I don't like to necessarily watch virtual events. My husband likes to listen to books and read them at the same time. I can do a mixture of the two. So we've all got different ways of communicating. And as a leader, we have to tune into the different ways our teams communicate. So if you've got a huge organization, you can't do that individually. So you just have to find the different ways of saying the same thing using different methods. If you've got a small team, or you're leading a team, get to know them. Ask them about their communication preferences. Like, is email okay? Are you happy with a phone call? Do you prefer WhatsApp? Like, have the conversation about how you want to be communicated with, because that will penetrate more in terms of that message you want to get across if you're using something that somebody's receptive to. If somebody is constantly putting stuff up on YouTube, I'm not a huge YouTube user. Like, I go in occasionally, but I'm way more in podcasts and audiobooks. But if you're just on YouTube, then I'm going to struggle to catch that, because it's not where I am. And that's what we have to learn. It's not about being everywhere, because that's exhausting, but it's about going where the people are that you need to communicate with. And that's the important.
Jenni, I'm curious. Go ahead, Dustin.
So your book, Nobody Believes You.
Yeah.
Obviously wrapped around the concept of credibility of a leader. What made you want to tackle this topic?
So the reason I wanted to tackle this topic is because in all of my work helping organizations improve communication, all routes lead to leadership. So you can change the channels that you use to communicate. You can create amazing campaigns, but if leaders aren't demonstrating, communicating, behaving in a way that is aligned to the values and the culture of the organization, it's not going to have the impact we need. So that was the first bit. The second bit was my issue with the word authentic. So the word authentic started being used a lot more so in the pandemic, right? There was a lot of be more authentic, show your authentic self, be more vulnerable, have more empathy, be more human, show more compassion. There was all these big words in the pandemic coming out. And I just started to feel that authentic was a bit uncomfortable. And I was like, I'm just not sure that we want people to be authentic, actually. Is that really what we want? Especially as a leader, when you're in a position of power, is that really what we want? So I started to delve into credibility, because I was like, actually, the outcome is we want to be followed. Does being authentic do that? Not on its own, and can easily be weaponized. And I'll come on to that in a second. But then I started to look at this credibility piece of, actually, to follow someone, we want them to be credible. What does being credible mean? We talk a lot about being trustworthy or having empathy. What does that really mean? So I started to look at that, and then I did my own research into what is it that makes you follow certain leaders, and as a leader of these kind of different things, how would you rank them in terms of your credibility? And so that's where the book came from, was trying to figure out that sort of secret ingredient, if you like, of what are the things I need to be a leader that people will follow. And to come back to my point on the authentic and being weaponized, is it's very easy to behave badly and then say, I'm just being my authentic self. And when you are a leader, you are in a position of power, whether you like that or not. there is a power dynamic there, and therefore that carries so much more weight. Whereas it's very hard to kind of weaponize credibility, and equally hard to weaponize being genuine, being authentic, because of how we've treated it in society. It's just become something that can excuse poor behavior, and I don't think that's acceptable.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You know, the word weaponized, I think, is so spot on, and because it really is just an excuse that.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to be disingenuous,
No.
but that doesn't mean that just because, oh, you know what, I'm just not a listener.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, you better figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, like, well, I just don't follow through on stuff. Yeah, that's just not me. Like, well,
Yeah.
then
Just who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and but even to your point of, as you said earlier, I mean, if somebody has that, it's so how do you speak to them? Like, okay, that's fair. That's your authentic self. But what impact is that going to have on you as a leader, on your as business, your relationship, you know, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I love that.
I've never heard anyone use that reference, so I love that I can learn something new every day. Jenni, I'm curious. So, as someone, I've worked in marketing for a very long time, and every once in a while I'll come across these blogs where it's like the 5 best tips to maximize your social media, and half the time it's like insert eye roll because tens of thousands of people have regurgitated these same things, half of which aren't even good tactics anymore.
Yeah.
So as you look at communication and you look at a lot of this stuff for big businesses, what are some of the things you look at and you're like, please don't do that? No, that is actually terrible advice. Or maybe doing more harm than good, because I'm sure there are ideas out there like that people try that are just, they don't work anymore.
Yeah, and I do a lot of eye rolling.
Good.
As I think we all do. When we've worked in an industry for a long time, you go, oh, God, here we go. So the things I see around communication in organizations, and especially at the moment where we're really struggling with what does work look like post-pandemic. And I know it's 5 years on, but we're still figuring out that office hybrid, like how we work together, all that stuff. So the things that make me do the eye roll is technology will solve all of our problems in communication. That's not true. So if you think you can just plug in some tool and it's going to help you communicate, that won't work. So don't do that. What else is there? The thing that makes me eye roll at the moment is this, we need to get rid of email that's been going on for 20 years. And there's still this, we shouldn't have email, we should be having something else. But I saw some recent data that was like 80% of people say it's their preferred channel. And I think it's not about the tools, it's about the content. And I think that's where we get it wrong, is we're trying to find that tool that's going to help us. But it's the hard work, right? It's the hard work on your behaviors, your skills, the content, the messaging, all the stuff that makes us read an article and open an email in our personal lives is what works inside organizations. So it's doing the hard work. It's don't believe that email has to disappear. It doesn't. And don't believe that technology is going to solve all of the problems for how you communicate, because it won't. And I think the other thing that I would like to see more of, and it's linked to the technology, is where people say, you know, we don't need to get together as a team. We can all work remotely. That's absolutely fine. That's not always fine. Like, we're human beings. We need social connection. We do work better together. And you don't get that same connection online. And even people that have written books on remote work will say it's the hardest thing to do. And you have to get your team together a couple of times a year. So it's that investment in bringing people together. So just don't think you can shortcut it, I suppose. That's probably my biggest eye roll, is that trying to think you can get around it with a gimmicky solution or something, because you can't. We're human beings, and work is such a huge part of our lives that it deserves the time and attention we need to give it.
You know, just along those lines, I think that's a great point. I think as leaders, I know I've fallen in this trap where you forget that maybe you know everyone on your team, but not everyone knows everyone on your team.
Yes.
So like at McClone Insurance, we have about 130 team members scattered around, well, the state and the country in some ways. And I mean, I know all of them. But then all of a sudden, we actually just had one this past week. We had like 15 get together. And it was amazing, the human connection that existed there, right? It was like, oh, well, I see all of you in person, mind you, all the time. So I get my human, and I think leaders are so often fall into that trap because, we might be going to the different locations and all that sort of stuff. And, maybe it's only once a quarter or once a year or whatever, but we're still getting that connection. So then once you have that connection, I feel like virtual can maintain it, right? But it never really accelerates it. Right.
No.
And because you can reach back to like, oh yeah, over time it might deplete, but I feel like that in person, and I know we've spent a ton of effort since the pandemic of just finding ways to get humans together to create that connection, because it's amazing how many people before it happens don't want it to happen. They say they love remote work. They love hybrid. They don't need to be in the office. And then you get them together and they're like the most elated people because they're around other people. And it's like, do you not see, you see the connection here?
Contagious energy.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge is, we're so convinced that we make the best choices for ourselves, but we very rarely do. We always think this is the best thing for working at home and doing this is best for me because I do this, this, and this. But we're in the biggest issue of loneliness and mental health and burnout and all of those things. And so much of that will correlate to being on your own and being very task focused and not having the social connection. So I love to hear that you've brought people together. And as a leader, that's our job, right? Create that space for people. It's not about you filling it, but it's about you creating that space for people to come together and share and collaborate, and you guiding and supporting that. And that is always brings me joy.
Yeah, you bet.
Jenni, this is an interesting conversation because this is literally something for everybody. I don't care where you're at in your career or where you're at in general, whether you're, a stay-at-home parent or executive or an intern. Everybody needs help with communication, even coaches, which is something that Dustin and I talk a lot about. So I've really enjoyed the conversation. But before we wrap it up, take a moment just to tell everybody about your book and anything else you have going on.
Yeah, thank you. So the book came out at the end of October 24. So it's called Nobody Believes You, Become a Leader People Will Follow. We've sold over 4,000 copies in the first 6 months. And we've now developed a course to go alongside that. So you can read the book and it will cover the 8 practices of being a credible leader. And it's got really practical tips in it about what you can do. It's got stories in it from my work with names and industries changed, but it's full of that practical story-based stuff. And you can read it in less than 4 hours. It's a short book, which I wanted so people could read it quickly. And we've got the course that goes with that if you're interested in really learning how to lead with credibility. And I just think if we could all invest like a day of our time in being a better leader, then the impact we could have on the world of work could be phenomenal. And that's what drives me every day.
Yeah, but well said. It just feels like everything stems from communication. Like that is the foundation of everything that we do. And I go back to personal brand, and to me, it's just how you show up. It's your communication. It's your body language. It's all the things that you embody. And so often we as leaders, myself included, forget that sometimes it's the thing we overlook the most, which is the thing we do the most, which is our communication.
Yeah, spot on.
Well, Jenni, it's been a real treat. Thank you so much for being on the show. There's so much more I'd love to talk about, like the role in AI, but we don't have time. So we're going to have you back in the near future. I see you laughing over there like this is just a black hole we could go down and talk about forever.
Yeah.
And we will next time around. So for all the listeners out there, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. We appreciate the ears. Until next time, peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.